Excuse me. Excuse me. Are you Miss Eiffel?
Yes.
Am I interrupted?
Yes.
I'm the assistant your publishers hired.
The publishers think I have writer's block.
Do you have writer's block?
I don't know how to kill Harold Crick.
This is a story about a man named Harold Crick. Harold lived a life of solitude. He would walk home alone. He would eat alone. When others' minds would fantasize about their upcoming day,
Hello?
Harold just counted brush strokes.
All right, who just said Harold just counted brushstrokes? Dave, I'm being followed.
How are you being followed? You're not moving.
It's by a woman's voice. She's narrating.
Oh.
Harold couldn't concentrate on his work.
I can't think while you're talking.
You have a voice speaking to you.
About me, accurately, and with a better vocabulary.
Harold found himself exasperated,
Shut up!
cursing the heavens in futility.
No, I'm not. I'm cursing you, you stupid voice, so shut up and leave me alone!
So you're the young gentleman who called me about the narrator. The thing to determine conclusively is whether you're in a comedy or a tragedy. Have you met anyone recently who might loathe the very core of you?
I'm an IRS agent.
Get bent, tax man!
Everyone hates me.
Well, that sounds like a comedy.
Have you written anything new today? I figured out how to kill Harold Crick.
Little did he know that events had been set in motion that would lead to his imminent death.
What? Why? Hello? Come on!
This woman, Karen Eiffel, is one of my favorite authors.
That's her. That's the voice. She's the narrator. Karen Eiffel, my name is Harold Crick. I believe you're writing a story about me.
Is this a joke?
You have to understand that this isn't a story to me. It's my life. I want to live. I need to speak to Karen Eiffel. I'm one of her characters.
I'm sorry?
I'm in her new book, and she's going to kill me.
How exciting is that?
Ciao people, and welcome to our 152nd episode of Gold Standard, the Oscars movie podcast, where we travel through time, reviewing the films that earn their gold statue, or standard if you will, and beyond. I am one of your co-hosts, DJ Nick, and as always, joining me at the Gold Standard Theatre is one of my two podcasting partners in crime, the professional nerd herself, Rachel Friend. Hey Rachel, how are you today?
Considering the conversation we were having before we started recording, if I had to answer, I'm pretty sure I'm living in a tragedy right now, not a comedy.
Well played indeed. Unfortunately, folks, our cohort, Zan Sprouse, will not be joining us today, but do not fret, dear listeners, she will return. Speaking of returns, joining us today is the lady who brought the film that we're discussing today to the Gold Standard Theatre, and that is the one and only Christine Peruski. Hey, Christine, how are you? And welcome back.
Christine nervously made small talk. Very small talk. I am doing as good as I can living in today's America, and I'll leave it at that.
Well said indeed. And I think today's going to be a very interesting conversation because today, as I mentioned, we are reviewing a movie that Christine selected, and that is, of course, Stranger Than Fiction. This was directed by Mark Forster. It was written by Zach Helm, while the score was by Britt Daniel and Brian Reitzel. An estimate, put in today's money, adjusted for inflation, this movie cost $47 million to make and made $70 million at the box office. It was released on November the 10th of 2006 and has a runtime of roughly 1 hour and 54 minutes. So, Christine, as you are our guest and as you brought today's movie, what are your general thoughts and impressions on Stranger Than Fiction?
For me, this is such a perfect little movie. It's perfectly subtle and well hidden. Most people I talk to have not seen this movie, and that is the true tragedy. While watching this movie, I find myself constantly looking at the background. Like, for the first half of the movie, Harold, our main character, is constantly in a cage. Lots of vertical and horizontal lines. All of the views outside the windows are just more windows from the next building, sometimes looking far too close to the building he's in. There's tiling in places that don't seem to make sense, which also give a caged-in look. But as he starts to expand his world, the world around him becomes more softer, more open. His friend's apartment is filled with lots of curved lines. The bakery has lots of curved lines. It's honestly difficult to find any significant lines in Anna's apartment. And, the fact that I'm talking about this, I don't tend to notice the background design of any movie, like the art direction, anything like that. It's rare for it to stand out to me. And every time I watch this movie, I'm like, look at what's going on behind him. Look at what's going on behind him. This is crazy how much effort they put into it. And so that alone makes this movie stand out to me. And I just love how quirky the storyline is. And like most importantly to me, like a lot of people I know are not really fans of Will Ferrell. Like his comedy style, it's just not my thing. I can't take any of it. I don't like Elf. I had a friend convinced I would like Anchorman. I barely chuckled twice through the whole movie. So this role for Will Ferrell is just amazing. Like this proves that he is a good actor, but he just gravitates towards those comedic roles like that. I prefer him as the straight man like he is in this movie. It's really good, and I wish he would do more of it.
I'm right there with you because I was not really ever a fan of Will Ferrell, the comedian, but seeing him in this, I'm like, wow, do more movies like this. It kind of makes me think of Jim Carrey, for example, when it comes to him doing more serious stuff. And I love him when he does that. And of course, we have talked about Jim in other more serious movies. And Rachel, what did you make of this one?
Yeah, this is one of those where it's like, I remember when this was coming out, I remember seeing like the trailer and ads for it, but I had no desire to see it because, again, I'm not that big of a Will Ferrell fan. Yeah, I liked some of the stuff he did on SNL. I mean, his impression of Alex Trebek is, gonna go down in SNL history. But once he left SNL and did what a lot of them have done and tried to pursue a movie career, when you cut your teeth on something like Saturday Night Live, which is known for being pretty much nonstop comedy, and you leave to try to pursue an acting career outside of that, people are expecting you to do comedies, and that's what he did. I've never seen Anchorman, either of them. I don't really care to. Like, I recognize Ron Burgundy when I see him, and I recognize the voice. I can't
recommend it for you. Sorry.
Yeah, I do reference The Glass Case of Emotions quite a bit, though. So there's just a few things that he's done.
I love Lamp. Yeah, that's about it for me. I love Lamp.
Yeah, I think maybe the only other movie of his that I've seen all the way through is Talladega Nights, and that's only because at one point I was a huge NASCAR fan. So, but yeah, when you get someone who is known for being funny and does something like this, that plays against, essentially type, you wonder, it's like, okay, this is going to show, are they a good actor or are they just good at punchlines? Do they have good comedic timing? And this is one of those that you find out that no, actually Will Ferrell actually can be a pretty good actor. I mean, there's still some funny moments in this, especially early on when he's trying to figure out what the hell is going on and he's hearing the voice and nobody else is. And he's yelling at the sky. It's like he does have some moments of that kind of wacky Will Ferrell that we're used to, but then it gets serious. And the thing is, it's like even once we get the kind of the countdown starts, thanks to his watch of his imminent death, even with that kind of sword of Damocles hanging over him, it's like at the same time this guy's starting to live his life, and you get to experience all the joy and everything that he's finding that he hasn't had before. The character growth that Harold goes through this, Ferrell just does a fantastic job of portraying it. I do have to say it also probably helps that even though I don't really care for Will Ferrell, the actor, I do like him as a person. The documentary that he came out with last year with his friend Harper, where they go on a road trip. Harper is a trans woman, and they decide to go on this road trip together for Will to kind of get to know this more authentic version of the person, of the person that he used to know. Now that Harper is living, to her full authentic self. So they kind of go on this road trip, kind of discovering America and reaffirming their friendship, and to see, they could stop anywhere, from a big cities to small town USA, and a lot of people are gonna be like, "Oh, Will Ferrell, Ron Burgundy, Ricky Bobby, Saturday Night Live, and all that," and Will be like, "Yeah, yes, y'all know me, but have you met my friend Harper?" And you get these people that are, salt of the earth, I'm sure. So, a lot of them are good people, but they're driving through essentially the Midwest, so it's a lot of right-wing conservative, and Harper might be the first trans person they've actually ever met. So it's a really beautiful kind of travel diary, this documentary is, and it made me really come to appreciate who Will Ferrell is as a person. To see
Will
kind
and
of the
Harper
man.
Available on Netflix. FYI.
Yes, I mean, there's some moments where you're just like, if you're more on the liberal side of things, unfortunately, one of their stops is here in Indianapolis, and they go to a Pacer game where Harper is not that welcomed, unfortunately, which makes me really mad for my fellow Hoosiers. Like, really? It didn't help that they ran into one of our local politicians too, that happens to be on the other side of where I sit. So it's like, yeah, that's good representation for Indiana right there. But and this was obviously Will filmed this way before he had this experience with Harper, but I think it's with actors, whether they are method or whatever, they do draw upon their life experiences. And I think that maybe whatever was going on in Will Ferrell's real life at the same time that he was making this transition professionally, that he tapped into something, or he was able to tap into something and give us this performance. So, and I think since then, and seeing some of the things that he's been doing since, that there's a possibility of more performances like this potentially.
I hope so, because if there are more serious movies with Will in them, I'll definitely check them out. I mean, my frame of reference was his role of Lord Business in the Lego Movie, and of course the father in that, and I absolutely loved the Lego Movie. But yeah, this was an interesting experiment for myself.
The Lego Movie does not count as far, because it's a kids movie.
Fair enough. But yeah, when it comes to this one, there is, I think, something quietly disarming about it, because it doesn't rush to impress you. It just sort of unfolds. And before you realize it, you're leaning in. And what struck me first is how it plays with control. Not in a loud, chaotic way, but in a very precise, almost surgical sense. Life here feels measured and structured and predictable until it isn't. And when that structure cracks, even slightly, everything becomes uncertain. Not explosive, just unsettling in a way that lingers. And the tone is also very unusual, as Christine was mentioning it. It kind of balances absurdity and sincerity without ever tipping too far into either. There is humor, but it's dry and deliberate, and the kind that makes you pause for a second before it lands. And underneath that, I think there's a steady current of something more reflective, almost melancholic, but not quite. It feels more like awareness, like the film is gently asking you to notice your own routines, your own patterns, and question how much of your life is actually chosen. Once again, to Christine's point, visually it does mirror that feeling. The clean lines, the ordered spaces, the repetition, everything looks like it belongs to a system. And I think that makes the small disruptions stand out even more. A change in rhythm, break in symmetry. Those moments carry weight because the world has trained you to expect consistency. And what really stayed with me, though, is the way it handles the idea of meaning. It doesn't shout its message. It doesn't try to convince you of anything outright. Instead, it presents this quiet tension between living safely and living fully, between you being defined and defining yourself. And I think it leaves space for you to sit with that tension rather than resolve it neatly. So by the end, I think it feels less like a story you've watched and more like a question that's been placed in your hands. Not a heavy one, but a persistent one. The kind you turn over in your mind later in small, ordinary moments. So I wouldn't say it's a film that demands attention, but it earns it very slowly. And somehow that makes it stick. And I'm very grateful to Christine for bringing this film, because if not, I would never have watched it. And I'm so glad that I did. So let's get to our characters on the board, starting with our IRS agent, the woman he loves, and the man who helps on this particular journey. We have the aforementioned Will Ferrell as Harold Crick, Maggie Gyllenhaal as Anna Pascal, and Dustin Hoffman as Professor Jules Hilbert. So Rachel, starting with you, what did you make of this trio?
Oh, I think I'm going to go in reverse, kind of. Actually, I'll probably just jump around. Jump around. Lord. The thing is, it's kind of hard to talk about Harold without also wanting to talk about Karen, is the thing. Because you've got the thing with this story is they don't necessarily, there's not really anything in the way of explanation of how this world works. How someone can write a novel and it turns out that one of their characters actually exists in the same world that they live in. And not just it's not just the main character. I mean, obviously, at the end of it all, it's, Harold is the main character in this novel that this woman is writing. But Anna's a character as well, but we only get so much narration from Karen. So how many of the people that Harold interacts with are people that exist in this world but aren't part of the novel? And because of that, his interactions with them and especially Jules, Professor Hilbert's part in this, what he says and suggests to Harold is that there's a lot of questions in here about predetermination and free will and destiny. It's not a surprise that, as Harold is slowly, once he's forced to go on vacation from the IRS because he's been working there for, years and years and years without ever taking a vacation. And to the rest of his coworkers, it kind of seems like maybe he's having a little bit of a mental breakdown or something. And he slowly starts to find things to do because he's been living this very repetitive, measured, literally measured by the brushstrokes of his toothbrush, by the steps it takes him to get to the bus, this very mundane, repetitive, measured life, that one of the things we see him doing is going to the movie theater, probably in the middle of the day, in a more casual getup. He's ditched the suits and the silk ties and everything. And he's watching a Monty Python film. But very specifically, it is Monty Python and the Meaning of Life. And the scene that we see on the screen, I don't think is an accident. They could have, licensed the film and picked any scene. And there are several in the film that people would recognize. But the Mr. Creosote section is pretty famous as far as the vignettes and the scenes in this movie. But the idea that the scene that they show us is Mr. Creosote is essentially the opposite of Harold, who is so gluttonous and selfish and not reserved, just over the top, is living life so far to the fullest that the guy literally explodes. Yeah. He's so full on life, he literally explodes. I don't think that's a coincidence that's a particular scene that they show in the film.
Honestly, that scene is why I've only watched that movie once. It's so gross.
Yes, same. Yeah. I was like, I can handle a lot of things. Vomit is the explosion is okay, but the vomiting into the bucket I can't do. So give me Holy Grail or Life of Brian any day. So but if and this is something that they don't necessarily bring, especially, well, I mean, Anna never knows, as far as we know. Anna never finds out the truth. It seems like the night before, when he's staying over, and they're canoodling on the cat, in bed and everything, and he's like, I got something to tell you, and you think maybe he's gonna like tell her the whole thing, and he's like, no, he's giving her tax advice. Like, if this is the last time I get to talk to this woman that I've fallen for, I'm going to make sure she does not get screwed on her taxes.
I'm going to make sure she doesn't go to jail. I don't want her to go to jail.
Yeah. So she has no idea that she's also a character in this book. And we know she is because we've heard the narration. But Professor Hilbert, he knows, yet it never occurs to him that if he is conversing with Harold, does that mean he is now a character in the book? Or is somehow Harold stepping out? Not everything that Harold does is part of the narrative. How much wiggle room is there? Especially considering how like all over the place Hilbert is with his questioning, trying to help Harold figure this whole thing out. And the fact that like so many of these characters, and there are places and things and businesses that have names that, like, oh, that sounds like Karen, her last name's Eiffel. Crick, one of the 3 discoverers of DNA, which in itself I don't think is you have these scientists, and there were 3 of them. One of them was a woman. We should not let her be forgotten when it comes to the discovery of DNA. But he shares a last name with somebody who helped essentially discover one of the foundation of life. The literal fabric that creates life. The DNA. These little strands that twist together, and it's from all this little stuff and this proteins and everything, and that's where life comes from. Yet you've got a guy who's not living life. You've got Anna. Her last name's Pascal. Pascal is a mathematician, but he's also a philosopher. Most people have probably heard of Pascal's wager. A lot of people use it when referring to religion. But yet Anna is somebody who does not seem to weigh her decisions very much. She just does whatever. She's like, I don't feel like I should be paying taxes. I'm not going to. This crazy, seemingly crazy, might be homeless guy that comes and sits in my bakery all day and just talking nonsense. No, I'm gonna give him food. Doesn't matter what, she doesn't care what other people think. People seem to like her. She seems to like them. She's developed quite a relationship with the community around her business. And then Hilbert, the actual Hilbert, his thing was 23 questions, which is, he ends up devising a list in here of 23 questions, not mathematics related, but 23 kind of literary questions, trying to eliminate like what kind of story Harold is living in. But it's like, the actual Hilbert was kind of famous for his list of 23 questions, and some of them have never been able to been answered. Yeah, Hilbert in here, they find answers, but at the same time, it's like, did the answers really matter? So, these people are they share a name with somebody famous, yet the life that the characters are living is kind of the opposite of what that person was known for. Again, nothing in here is accidental. Just like Christine was saying with like the architecture and the framing and how everything is so rigid, and we're constantly seeing like math calculations and all sorts of things pop up on the screen as Harold is doing his seemingly just kind of now automatic calculations that he just does in his head all day, every day. And as his life begins to change, he loses the suits, he loses the ties. He's, it's softer, like I said, Anna's shop. There's not really a lot of straight edges. I mean, there's literally a round window that Harold will sit there and stare at her through the window. And for Hilbert, he's kind of the bridge between these two lives. But he's looking at it purely from an academic perspective. So, like, it seems like, he does seem to eventually seems to develop, a loose working friendship with Harold. And he and Anna's paths never cross, at least in the film. But Harold talks to him about Anna, and therefore he gives his 2 cents on things. But Harold is, I'll kind of have to, again, I'm going to kind of have to stop my thought here, because to me, Harold is kind of the other side of the coin to Karen, where they're both people that live and breathe literature. But Hilbert, goodness gracious, I should really just use the actors' names. It'd be much easier. Dustin Hoffman is the academic. So he very much, approaches everything with that lens. The idea of asking Will Ferrell all these questions to try and eliminate, what kind of story or novel or whatever, Harold's life he's living. But as we see with Karen is very much about feeling and being very abstract and looking at things from different angles, and being very observant, but not necessarily in a way that's analytical. It's more, she's working more on vibes more than anything. So, as Christine's like, got her hands out, wiggling her fingers.
Did you ever think about jumping off a building?
We can talk about that. But yeah, these three make an interesting kind of Venn diagram, with kind of Harold being in the middle, and how their influence, because they're different attitudes on how they think life works, comparatively to Harold, who really has never given it a single thought up until this point. You can see how they influence him, and in the process, he influences them as well, but neither of them really have the character evolution that Harold does, which is kind of the point, because he is the main character. I mean, he's got main character syndrome, whether he likes it or not. Which, this movie's not that old, but if it's only 10 years old, but it's interesting, if they were to make it now, the idea of main character syndrome, this could have been taken a whole different direction, which I'm glad that it doesn't have the influence of today.
Very much so, yes, it is. I'm glad it kind of doesn't, because it probably would have been a much more depressing movie, I believe, had it been maybe made, now. And Christine, what did you make of this rather interesting trio?
Aren't you relieved to know you aren't a gullible? To Rachel's point, we never actually hear narration during Professor Hilbert's scenes. I think if Karen had been writing about him, it might have given the game away because she knows him from his letters. She likes his letters. And I wonder what happens in her book that changes Harold's life, because Professor Hilbert is what drives a lot of the choices Harold makes. I mean, obviously he goes to Professor Hilbert because he's hearing this narrator, which obviously is not happening in her book. Her character does not know he's going to die. So he couldn't possibly be hearing a narrator. But something in her book is driving this very rigid man to change his life, for the story. In what we see, it's Professor Hilbert is really directing the choices he makes, because Harold's at a loss, like Harold at first is oddly content to deal with this strange little phenomenon of hearing a woman's voice in his head all on his own. But what really moves this story forward is hearing that he's going to die. And I really have to hand it to him. He dives into this problem wholeheartedly and methodically. I doubt any normal person, and he seems to be like the avatar of normal people for this movie. Like, this is the quintessential normal person, boringly normal, but like no normal person would have his persistence. And ironically, for someone so rigid, he's quite good at being unexpected. My absolute favorite part of the movie is him bringing flowers to Miss Pascal. That's like the one thing when I tell people, you've got to watch this movie, and I'll say my favorite part is when he brings her flowers. And I'm like, you'll understand when you see it. Because it's like, you don't realize that it's not typical. And it's just like, it's the best pun in the world. You couldn't possibly do this for most people, but because she's a baker, he can bring her baking flowers and have it be the most adorable, sweet gesture in the world. I love it. But he's also, he's got this, he's unbelievably clever. Because he's got like this quip when they're on the bus about leaving his thimbles and socialist reading material at home. It's so adorable. And as Will Ferrell, I can't stand him in like so many roles, but I can see the appeal of this character, the way he portrays him, because it's just so quietly, quietly perfect, quietly adorable. And I love Miss Pascal. And I like calling her Miss Pascal because that's how Karen narrates her all the time. Miss Pascal. She doesn't say Anna. She says Miss Pascal. I would get fat at her shop. I would be stopping by there regularly. And I assume she would just force feed me cookies if I hadn't eaten anything after being there for an hour, because I would bring my laptop and work there. And it was such a dumb move of her. I highly recommend the movie Secretary if you like that sort of thing. Nick's seen it. Oh, he knows what I'm talking about. Okay. I think that Harold falls for her because she kind of represents a loss of control, and he realizes he likes that. And she comes into his life right when he has a loss of control in his life. He can't get rid of this voice in his head, and he can't change the fact that he's going to die. And right along with all of this change comes Miss Pascal, who is like, a representative for those things. And as much as he rails against changes to his structured routine, she helps him admit that he likes the change. This is what he actually likes. There's so many things in his life that are strict and rigid, structured. And that's just how he's been going about his life the whole time. And as Professor Hilbert points out, there's nothing literary about him, nothing interesting about him. He's so boring. The interesting part is who he should be, who he's supposed to be and who he becomes because of these things that are happening to him in his life. Professor Hilbert was just adorably quirky professor. I want one. He has a serious coffee problem and he should seek help. Because when we first see him, he has a cup of coffee, which he takes into the bathroom and drinks while peeing. Gross. And I don't know what happened to that cup of coffee between being in the bathroom and walking down the hall, because he then gets another coffee from a vending machine. This is the same conversation. And he takes it out of the vending machine before it's even done filling. And he carries that into his office, sets it down at his desk, and then he walks over to his coffee pot and pours himself another cup of coffee. And if you look around his room, there's just so much coffee. There's so many coffee, so many different types of coffee cups. Like, listen, I love coffee. I'm there with you, but this is a bit much, and you maybe need to seek help, professional help. But like, it's those details, those little details that make this movie something I love. You know, like you could watch the movie over and over again and go, oh my God, did you notice he just poured that coffee back into the coffee pot? Like, how long has that coffee been in that pot? And how long has it been burning? Oh, and they don't draw attention to it. It's just something they do. And I love movies that do that. They put so much effort into these little quirks that you may or may not notice. I love it. And I love his dedication to what Harold has brought to him. You know, at first he's not interested. He's like, okay, you're just crazy. But then he just says that one line, you know, little did he know. And ooh, you got him. You flipped on a light switch. He's hooked. And then he's like, this is just another literature project for me. It's a new thing that I can explore, and I'm gonna go through a process here. We're gonna look into this thing. We're gonna solve the problem. We're gonna go through the steps that one does when reviewing, exploring literature, all that stuff. You know, honestly, I wish someone would make a project out of me like that. You know, like, I want that kind of attention. And I think Dustin Hoffman plays this character so well. He's got so much range in all the different roles he's played, and I don't know if he just like fell into this role perfectly or if he worked at it, but I can't imagine anybody else playing Professor Hilbert. He might be my favorite character in this whole movie. He's just bizarre and overly addicted to coffee.
I agree. I mean, yes, I think our professor might be slightly over-caffeinated sometimes, but you make some great points there, Christy, for sure. But yeah,
as someone who used to work at a university, no, that's about right, especially for the ones that are in the liberal arts.
Okay, well, fair enough then, I guess. But yes, I guess when it comes to these three characters, they do very much feel like different answers to the same question. I.e., how much of a life is really being lived and how much is just being followed. And yeah, I agree. I mean, Harold starts as someone almost erased by routine. You know, everything about him is precise and controlled and small. And it's not that he's unhappy in an obvious way. It's more that he's absent from his own life. What I think is interesting is how little it takes to disrupt that. You know, once that crack appears, you see how fragile that structure really was. And his arc isn't about becoming someone else entirely. It's about becoming someone at all. You know, there's a kind of innocence in the way he approaches change, like he's learning basic things most people take for granted. And that makes his growth feel oddly sincere. When it comes to Anna, I think she feels like the opposite energy at first. She's impulsive and she's expressive and resistant to systems and authority. And where he is rigid, like you guys were pointing out, she is loose. But she's not just there to shake things up. There's purpose in her intensity. You know, she knows what she cares about and acts on it, even if it costs her. And what makes her work is that she doesn't soften completely. She doesn't turn into a neat lesson or a reward. Instead, I think she exposes the gap in our main character's life by simply living hers more openly. And then I will agree with Christine. Jules Hibbert is probably my favorite character in this as well, because he very much brings a different kind of grounding. He's reflective without being detached and analytical without being cold. because he understands structure, but he's not trapped by it. In a way, I think he acts like Rachel was saying, a bridge between logic and meaning. While others are caught inside the situation, he can step back and interpret it. But he's not cynical about it. If anything, I think he treats the whole thing with a kind of curiosity, to Christine's point, almost respect for the strangeness of it. So I'd say that as, take them as a trio together, I think they create a balance. One represents structure without life, one represents life without structure, and one understands both. And the film, I think, lets them influence each other without forcing them into simple transformations. And that's what makes them feel real. They don't resolve into clean answers. They just move slightly towards something more awake. And I think everybody here brought their A game when it came to their acting. And I will also add, it's wonderful that we're talking about this movie on its 20th anniversary, because I guess that's how podcasting sometimes happens, because this movie came out in 2006, now 2026. Nice. So let's round off our characters with our author and her amazing assistant. We have Emma Thompson as the aforementioned Karen Eiffel and Queen Latifah as Penny Escher. So, Christine, your thoughts on Karen and Penny?
Well, first, I'd like to give a shout out to Penny. Penny, we could really use you to go over to Nick's place and give him a little push. Because, see, Nick apparently doesn't need a nicotine patch. He smokes cigarettes. He's already lit to this podcast, everyone. Maybe she could push him to quit. I don't know.
Please, Penny, we need you, definitely. We need an intervention.
I do love these two. I would watch a spin-off of just these two. There is some excellent chemistry here. Like the way the first three sort of balance each other out. These two balance each other out as well. Penny would be the structured, ordered, reasonable person, whereas Karen is just free-form experience and creativity and craziness. She is so neurotic and filled with absolutely bizarre mannerisms. And I love, like, at the end when she comes in, like, she's finished the book on legal sheets, and she says, "I figured out how to kill Harold Crick," and she bounces at the crick. It's just the little quirkiness, and then she clasps the pen in her lips, which is still attached to the papers, as she walks away, and she'll talk with the pen in her lips. And it's like, I've seen Emma Thompson in a lot of things. She does not act like this normally. This is something she took on for this role. Just the author who has been trying to write the same book for 10 years and is driving her crazy. Just standing on her desk, feeling the air, imagining jumping off a building. Because doesn't everybody think about jumping off a building? Probably people who live in cities, but not us folk living in the country. If I jumped off the buildings here, I might twist an ankle, because that's about all the height we got here. And like there's so many details put into this character, like with Professor Hilbert. Like, I noticed she doesn't seem to own an ashtray. There are little crumpled tissues all over the place because she spits in them and puts the cigarettes out in that, which is so gross. So gross. Don't do that. Get an ashtray. Yeah, and they did a wonderful job on her hair and makeup. She looks so strung out and stressed out. And her hair is beyond bedhead. It's just crazy. But I love when Harold finally comes in there at the end, and she's just... This is exactly what she's been picturing probably for 10 years. She knows every inch of this man. And here he is in the flesh. And she's scared, and she backs away. And she's like, "Your hair, your eyes." And she's like going down his body. She literally gets on all fours. "Your shoes." Like, what I love about it is that sometimes I want to act that way. I start to act that way, and people are like, "What are you doing?" And because I'm not a rich author, where we accept quirkiness out of someone, because the eccentricities of the creative and rich, like I'm not allowed to do that because I haven't, made it big. So people look at me funny. But then, when we're introduced to this character, we're almost immediately introduced to the extreme opposite, Penny, who turns this into the odd couple buddy cop team up. She's straight-laced, no nonsense, wears a suit, and just deals with whatever Kay throws at her. Yeah, and I love the list of things she will do and won't do. She, and ironically, doesn't abide loud music. I'm like, wait, what was your previous career, Queen Latifah? So, but despite being so strict and focused on the goal of finishing this book by the deadline, which she has never gone back to the publisher asking for more time, she does understand the moral crisis that is presented when Harold shows up. You know, like this is a very unusual situation, and honestly, I think we need to break some rules here. And she goes to the publisher and asks for more time because honestly, the book has to change. Like she has to go back and rewrite the whole thing. And you know, I think it's kind of a good balance. You know, Penny is kind of as structured as Harold is in the beginning, but even she can see the need for a change in structure when life happens. I mean, like this is so odd, and she takes everything in stride. You know, she's such a stabilizing force for the completely unstable Karen Eiffel. And I want to see these two write the next book. I want to see Karen write her next book with Penny there to help her along.
I am right there with you. I mean, Eiffel and Escher, that already is a great title. So, I mean, if ever that happens, I'm right there with you, Christine. I could definitely see a spin-off coming from these two characters because they're absolutely wonderful. And Rachel, you know, you and I, of course, have had the pleasure of talking other movies featuring both Emma and Queen Latifah. What did you make of these characters?
Well, once again, you've got two characters whose namesakes don't fit the personality of the person. You know, Penny is very orderly and structured, and you know, she comes in and she's like, okay, you know, I've done this for years and years and years, and this is what we're gonna do. She's like, I've always met deadlines. I've never had to ask for more time. You know, she's very orderly about things. But if you've ever seen an MC Escher drawing, you know the order is not does not exist in the Escher universe. Like physics doesn't seem to exist in Escher's works. But she, you know, because Karen is so just, you know, seemingly that erratic kind of artist that you imagine when you think of, you know, the artist who is suffering for their work or whatever, it seems like maybe some order is what Karen needs. Or maybe she just needs somebody to maybe literally talk her off a ledge. You know, some people are willing to go pretty far for their you know, their art, as it were. And, you know, it's because we're reading the Karen of now, we don't know necessarily what the Karen of before was like, other than that clip we see of her interview that's playing on the professor's TV in his office. But he's like, oh, that's from like 10 years ago. And she seems fairly put together then. So it's like, how long? This is partially why I said, you know, to talk about Harold, you have to talk about Karen, at least in my mind, because I watched this movie. You can find it like almost everywhere on the internet for free. I don't know what that says about, you know, like this movie isn't beloved enough that they're just like, let's just put it everywhere. Hopefully somebody will watch it somewhere at some point. But so I watch this on YouTube. It is officially on YouTube. You can watch it with ads. Fine by me. Free, I like. So yeah, that's my favorite price.
Hoopla and Canopy. Use your local library.
That it's available through them too. It just so happens that I was able to, yeah. At the time, YouTube was the easiest app for me to to get going. But because it's on YouTube, it does have comments. Although a lot of times with these movies they put up there, they turn the comments off for but for whatever reason, the comments are on for this. And one of the top comments, and I don't know how long it's been on YouTube, so the comment could be, I don't remember how old it is, but it was the top comment. And the top comment was, Harold has seemingly spent years of his life living this repetitive, mundane, measured existence for, assume it's the same amount of time as it's, the time he's been working for the IRS and never taken a vacation. And the reason he's in this rut is because he is the main character of a novelist who has writer's block. He's not evolving because the story is not evolving, because the author is not writing anything, because she is stuck, Harold is stuck. And that's why everything is so repetitive, because there's not being anything new written for him to, she started the novel, seemingly 10 years ago, and had this idea that her main character was going to be kind of this, white collar government worker, doesn't have a lot of friends, doesn't have much of a romantic life, doesn't have much in the way of hobbies, he's just very kind of dull. And her idea was probably this really stuck up, boring dude's going to meet this eccentric baker, and the two worlds are going to collide, and and the tragic twist at the end is he dies, because that's what happens in all of her books, is the hero dies at the end. Problem is, she couldn't figure out how to kill him. She spent 10 years with this idea of a book, and she had her character fleshed out, at least her main character fleshed out. I mean, when he shows up and she's like, you're exactly like what I pictured, it's like she thought him into existence, but then couldn't figure out how to tell his story. And that's why he's been on essentially lather, rinse, repeat for 10 years. Just day after day after day after day. And I think that's a fabulous way of looking at it. And it's not until she starts getting ideas that his life starts to change. And it's how much, it's like, would his life still follow the same path as far as meeting Anna and falling for her? Even if he had never heard the narration, it did not know he was going to die, because that's the story she's writing. The whole, the book is supposed to be called Death and Taxes. Because the famous quote from Benjamin Franklin, the only two things that are certain in life are death or taxes. And it's like, well, he works for the IRS, so he's got that taxes taken part of, and he's going to die. But where's the rest of it? And, where's the friendship? Where's the love? Where's the life? And that's what Anna is supposed to bring along, is he finally, starts living, and the tragedy is that he's going to die seemingly, too young, and he's going to suffer an untimely death. But because Karen is struggling so much, she eventually is able to start putting words down. And again, they don't really explain a whole lot about how this kind of universe works, other than Karen can write all she wants, like on napkins and scrap pieces of paper, and it's fine. It's not until she types it out that it becomes Harold's reality. So even when she kind of gets over the writer's block of not being able to write anything, it's the ending that she's stuck on. And that's why but because she's so sporadic, she spends, it seems like she spends more time smoking cigarettes and going to random places looking for ideas than actually typing. She would not do very well. I mean, that's a whole other ball of wax, the NaNoWriMo official thing, but still, she would not fare well in NaNoWriMo. But again, Karen, Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower. I mean, Eiffel built other things too, but obviously the tower is the thing that he's most famous for, and it is, it's famous because it is such a structural marvel that he was able to bring together, pieces of steel in a way that not only is aesthetically pleasing to look at, but is also architecturally unique. But it's very, I mean, you look at the Eiffel Tower and it's got this beautiful form, but it's very, you can tell that it is built piece by piece in a very particular way to get the end result. And it was very, it was a very, very, meticulous thing. Unlike Karen, who's just kind of all over the place and somehow manages to get it, presumably her process has been the same for every book she's ever written. It's just this time, she hit a wall that lasted for 10 years. And yet she's built this literary career where she's got people like, the professor who are writing her letters and, praising her work. But if they saw the madness behind the end result, they would be like, how does she get it? How does she manage to accomplish anything? But I get, you could probably drive yourself crazy. I know I would, playing armchair psychologist and psychiatrist, going down the rabbit hole of, like I said, the idea of destiny and free will and how much of our life do we actually have control over versus it being predetermined for you or
Versus
controlled by a high power.
Wrecking machine coming through your apartment.
Yes, exactly. Or is life just a series of random events that we just get up and plod along, and if we manage to make it home at the end of the day and sleep and wake up the next morning, you've accomplished something. It's interesting. I mean, you could sit here and psychoanalyze just Karen. It's like, somebody who seemingly does not have her shit together writes novels where in every single one, her main character, it's not even necessarily her main character. What the professor tells Harold is the hero always dies. That doesn't necessarily mean the hero is the main character in her novels. It's just the hero always dies in her books. And it's like, why is someone drawn to that's kind of like your literary signature? Is that her way of looking for some control? Because she does not have control in her own life, but she can control her, she can control who lives and who dies in her books. I have a friend actually, I know a lot of people are authors, but my best friend is an author. So I wonder if she's seen this. I should ask her, see what she thinks especially someone who writes fiction, obviously. Yeah, I'm working on a nonfiction book, which is a whole other ball of wax that is not pertinent to this conversation. But just let me tell you, just writing in general, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I feel for Karen. I really do. Sometimes I feel like I need a Queen Latifah to come busting in my room and kick me in the butt to make me do something.
Have you tried buying new typewriter paper?
Maybe I should just try writing on a typewriter. Maybe that's what I'm missing.
It might be a magical typewriter that actually controls somebody's life. You don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, my best friend, she writes on a typewriter sometimes, and she's got more words down than I do. Maybe I should follow her example.
I would love to actually write on a typewriter. I believe actually my father still has one from way back when, but
Tom Hanks collects typewriters.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is quite the hobby, I will say.
He really does.
He does.
Wow.
He loves it. Like if he writes anybody, he tries to do it on a typewriter.
Well, that is very cool. I do dig that. But yes, I mean, I guess as an amateur writer myself, I sometimes, and being more fiction, when watching this, I'm like, I hope I never meet one of my characters because I've done horrible things to them and they would be incredibly traumatized. So I hope I never meet any of my characters. But when it comes to these two, I definitely think they feel like they exist on a different layer of the story, but they're just as human and just as uncertain. I mean, if anything, they carry the weight of what the story means. I mean, Karen is fascinating because she does represent control at its most absolute and its most fragile. I mean, she creates worlds and decides outcomes and shapes lives down to the smallest detail. So I guess one could make the argument that authors, especially in fiction, might have a god complex. Other than that, on paper, I think that sounds very powerful. But in practice, she feels almost trapped by that responsibility. I mean, there's a heaviness to her process. Perfection isn't a preference for her, it's a burden. And what I think stands out is her relationship with, as we were talking about, endings. Because she doesn't just write them, she needs them to feel right, to carry weight, to justify everything that came before. And that need slowly turns into paralysis. I mean, you get the sense that she's not struggling with creativity as much as she's struggling with consequence. I mean, if a story demands something irreversible, can she actually go through with it? I mean, her arc becomes less about writing and more about confronting the moral reality of what it means to decide someone's fate, even in fiction. And then there's the wonderful Penny, who I think at first seems like a lighter presence, almost comic relief. She's practical, she's observant, and grounded in the real world in a way that contrasts very sharply with all the abstraction around her. But she's more important, I think, than she appears, because she is the one who quietly challenges that obsession with perfection. Not by arguing in big dramatic ways, but by bringing things back to a human level. She asks the simple question that cuts through everything. Does it have to be that way? Is the perfect ending worth the cost, even if it raises something genuine? What I like is that she doesn't dismiss artistry also. She just refuses to let it override empathy. I think she represents a kind of moral common sense that the story desperately needs. And together, I think they create a tension between intention and impact. One is trying to make something meaningful, even if it hurts, and the other is asking whether meaning should come at that kind of expense at all. And the film doesn't fully side with either, which I like, because it just lets that tension sit there, unresolved, in a clean way, but a very honest way. And once again, great performances from both these actresses for sure. So before we get to our ending, Christine, I believe you had something on the wristwatch that you wanted to mention.
Yes, I think Harold's wristwatch, is the other character in the book. It was mentioned quite often. And it is the true hero of the movie. It was instrumental in changing Harold's life for the better, and most definitely the more interesting. It's truly ironic how the watch, an instrument of precision, is the character trying the hardest to effect change. The wristwatch was also the character that was actually sacrificed in the story, saving Harold's life, and we should be eternally grateful for it. For those interested, it was a Timex Iron Man Dual Tech watch, but don't expect it to have that cool display. It normally has an LCD display, but they digitally altered it for the purposes of the movie. And that is all I have to say about Harold's wristwatch.
Well, very nice. And of course, as I know you wanted to talk about that, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. Rachel, did you want to add anything there when it came to the wristwatch, which wasn't, of course, on our characters list?
I mean, if you watch, the nice thing about this movie is this has, even once you find out the twist, this is one of those movies where I think you can watch it again and again and pay attention to different parts and get new information. Because like I said, there's so much in this movie that I believe was done intentionally. And the watch is one of them. If you pay attention to that watch's face when it's seemingly glitching, we're doing air quotes here, glitching, like because I think like the first time it does glitch is when Harold is outside waiting for the bus, and I think Anna walks by, and you see the watch face change, and it pops up a couple of like the at, as we know, the at you use for, in your email address or to tag someone on, Twitter or whatever. It for a split second there, it's those two kind of icons on the screen right next to each other, so it looks like a pair of eyeballs. It almost looks like the watch is oogling Anna, like scoping her out. Like, she looks interesting. Yeah. Wonder what what would happen bringing her into the picture, into the story. So, in a way, maybe the watch was playing matchmaker. They kind of anthropomorphize the watch so that it's more than just, this thing that this guy wears on his wrist. It does seemingly develop a personality and a bit of sentience in a way. And if you look at it that way, that could change your viewing experience watching this movie again.
Very much so. And I think, this film definitely does have that rewatchability value to it. And in fact, I definitely think I will sit down and rewatch it again at some point for sure, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And two, as you guys were pointing out, there's so many details that one might miss when it comes to just sitting down and watching it the once. So I definitely will check this out again. And interesting that model is an Iron Man, because that will play into what we will be revealing later during the course of this podcast. So let's get to how our movie ended. Of course, when we find out that Karen reveals that when Harold reset his wristwatch, the bystander's time was 3 minutes fast. So he reaches the bus stop early that particular morning. A boy riding a bicycle falls in front of the bus. Harold runs into the street to save him and is hit himself. However, Karen, traumatized by the idea that she unwittingly narrated real people to their deaths, cannot bring herself to finish the sentence declaring him dead. She meets Jules Hilbert and offers him a revised ending. Harold, then heavily injured, wakes up in a hospital and learns that shrapnel from his wristwatch, which was destroyed in the collision, blocked his ulnar artery and saved him from bleeding to death. Jules thinks this new ending weakens the book. Karen replies that the book was about a man who did not know he was going to die, but if Harold knew and accepted his fate, he's the kind of person who deserved to live. Karen's narration closes the film then over a montage of Harold's newly invigorated life, ending on the ruined wristwatch that indeed saved his life. So, Rachel, what do you make of our ending?
Well, if you want to get, uber metaphysical or whatever about it, in a way, Harold did die. Just, it was the old version of him that died. The boring, repetitive, workaholic, never taken a vacation in his life, never even had a damn chocolate chip cookie in his entire life person.
Store-bought. He had store-bought ones.
Yeah, well, never had a homemade chocolate chip cookie in his
not
entire
a real
life.
chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah. Has like one friend, no hobbies, no seemingly interests of any sort. That Harold is now dead and is never going to return after the things that he has learned going through this experience. So, I think, in a way, by not killing her main character, which, I mean, it's totally understandable why, Karen had was seemingly traumatized with the idea. It's like, she even asked Penny, she's like, how many people have I killed? Well, how many novels have you written? Well, there you go. In a way, Karen has kind of probably killed the process of the way she used to write books. Because it sounds like she was just kind of writing the same kind of book over and over again. And by her changing things up, there may be people that dislike it. But, at the same time, no matter how good an author is at telling a story, sometimes you just got to shake things up a little. I mean, because obviously what she had been doing was working up to a point, and then she hit this 10-year span of writer's block. So something had to give, and maybe changing the way she ends her books ultimately will help her open up new opportunities for writing other kinds of books in the future. So she's not just a one-trick pony. Oh, I mean, this movie really is not about one man facing his death. It's more about people discovering the difference between life and living.
And there is a major difference when it comes to that for sure. And that was why I guess I love a film that can allow people to reflect. Because when I was watching this, I was also kind of questioning my own choices. Thinking to myself am I living or am I just sort of coasting through life? And I appreciate when a film is not preachy, but it makes you think. And that's, I think, is a great thing that this film does. It doesn't preach a message to you, but it does leave food for thought, which is the mark of a great film. And Christine, what did you make of how our film came to a conclusion?
Well, I like how we have all these characters, they're presented with the truth of the situation, and they get faced with a choice. It seems to get passed from one to the next. We start with Penny, who clearly doesn't really have a say in any of this, but she has some influence and decides that Harold should go into this with all the information available and says, let him read it. Of course, Harold, he can't bring himself to read it yet, so he takes it to Professor Hilbert. And him being a man who only cares about good writing, decides easily that Harold should die for all the literary reasons. The story is a masterpiece, and it's a good and meaningful death. And it's a very simple decision for Hilbert, who was very removed from the situation. And then that decision gets passed on to Harold, who then finally does read the book. He doesn't understand much of the literary purpose to all this, but he can't understand the poetry of it. And he simply decides that dying to save a young boy is the right thing to do. And he does knowingly go to his death. He shows up early to the bus, and he makes sure that he's in a good position to run out into the street and save that boy. He knows it's coming. He does it anyway. So Professor Hilbert has said this is the way it has to go. Harold has gone to Karen and said, you should finish the book. This is the way it has to end. It's a good ending. It's a good book, and it makes sense. And so he's given her permission to do it. And so the decision lands on Karen, and she decides she can't kill him. And her reasons, she has two good reasons for this. They're the best reasons. A man who knowingly goes to his death, knowing he could stop it, and knowing that he could save somebody else by doing it, it's the type of man you do want to keep around. This is a good person, and that's the type of person you want in the world. But also, she makes a good point. I mean, Professor Hilbert thinks this ending is only okay, but I think that is what makes the ending perfect, is that she does save him. But also, she's right in that the original book was about a man who didn't know he was going to die. And that just wasn't the case anymore. That was not the person she was. This is the man, he knew pretty early on that he was going to die. Throughout that whole little did he know phrase, he did know. He found out early on, and he did everything to stop it, and yet still decided to go to his death willingly. It's such a wonderful, I don't care how that book turned out. I wonder if she went back to put the original book out, now that he's already passed the whole story. It's not like his life could reset and start over and put him through it again, and only for him to die for real this time. I wonder if she could actually put out the original version. Who knows? But I think this was the perfect ending to a perfect little movie. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't.
I think you make an excellent point there, because that's I think is the beauty of this ending. Because of course, for most of the film, or rather the ending itself, feels like a quiet argument that never turns into a speech. And for most of the film, everything points toward inevitability. There's this steady build-up that suggests some outcomes aren't just likely, they're necessary. The kind of ending that gives a story weight and symmetry and meaning. And you can feel that pressure the whole time. like the story is tightening around a conclusion it can't escape. And then it chooses not to follow through in the way you expect. And what I find interesting is that it doesn't reject that idea outright. It acknowledges that a certain kind of ending would have been powerful, maybe even perfect in a literary sense. I mean, there's a brief moment where you can almost see that version of the story, and it works. It would have made sense. It would have been clean, tragic, and complete. But the film steps away from that and asks something simpler. Is a perfectly constructed ending more valuable than a life that gets to continue, even if it's messier and less poetic? And I think that choice shifts everything. It turns the story from something deterministic into something humane. Not random and not cheap, but intentionally imperfect. And I think that's why the small detail at the end matters so much. The survival isn't meaningless. It comes with a cost. A reminder that the original path wasn't entirely erased. It leaves a trace, like the story acknowledging what it could have been. So instead of feeling like a cop-out, I think the ending feels like a compromise between two truths. One that values narrative beauty and one that values lived experience. Personally, I don't see it as the film choosing the easier option, like maybe Professor Hilbert might see it or others might see it. I see it as choosing the harder one, because it gives up a kind of artistic purity in favor of something more human and more forgiving. And it does that without pretending the other choice didn't have merit. And that's what stuck with me. Not just what happened, but the fact that the film lets you feel both versions at once. The one that was written and the one that was allowed. So an excellent ending, in my opinion. So let's get to if we were the Academy segment. In this case, this film was sadly not nominated for anything. This particular year, of course, was the year that The Departed won Best Picture and was the movie with the most nominations and awards. So, Christine, do you think that this film could have been nominated for anything at the Oscars?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to know enough about what goes on. It goes into these awards to know which movie deserved Best Picture better. Of the nominated films, I've only seen The Departed and Little Miss Sunshine. I'll say that I was a little bored through The Departed and kind of irritated at the existence of situations like that in our society. Little Miss Sunshine has the distinct honor of being the only film that made me wail in despair, and I will not go into why, or I might break down again. But I do think movies like Stranger Than Fiction and make you think more about what makes life worth living and worth dying for should get more attention. We need more like this in our lives to encourage people to seek out positive experiences. Now, I don't know if this movie deserved Best Picture, but it deserved more recognition than none. I mean, what the hell, guys? Not even a single nomination? The script, Emma Thompson's wacky performance, the production design, something. It was absolutely not at the Academy Awards at all, and I don't understand why. Like, does somebody working on the film have to put it forward for nomination? Do they have to campaign? I don't know. This should have been nominated for something. At the very least, the script. So, like, maybe not Best Picture. I know comedies don't tend to get Best Picture, but honestly, this is a dramedy, a quirkity. And, like, it's very upsetting to me that this movie is so under the radar, that nobody seems to know about it, even though it is apparently available everywhere. I encourage everybody to go watch this movie. It really is available in a lot of places, with ads, without ads, depending on what you have available to you. Please watch this movie. Please share it with friends. Just everybody needs to see this movie, and it needs some awards. Like, I looked it up. It did get nominated for other awards, not Academy Awards, but it didn't. I think it only won some obscure award that I've never heard of before. I think it was for the script, but that was it. I don't know who failed this movie, but somebody failed this movie. I love this movie, and I think it's a much better. I have watched this movie many, many times, and I've watched The Departed like once, so, and I don't want to watch it again. So, if you ask me, it's better than the one that got Best Picture. So, I don't know what the Academy's thinking.
which tends to often be the question that we ask ourselves on this podcast, i.e., what was the Academy thinking? And also, I think recently we kind of asked ourselves that question when it came to the 98th Best Picture winner. And Rachel, what are your thoughts on this one? Because as I was mentioning, The Departed won Best Picture, and Dreamgirls was actually the film with the most nominations.
Mm-hmm. Well, the less I say about The Departed, the better. I've already had that opportunity when we discussed it. So, every time Leo comes up, from what I understand with this movie, from the people that either saw it when it was released or discovered after the fact, that I guess the issue when this movie was originally released, because it didn't do that well as far as like the box office is concerned, is it was not marketed well. I guess they weren't confident enough in Will Ferrell's ability to play against type, and so it was marketed so that it was more funny, I guess, than it actually is. Which nowadays you could market something as a dark comedy and people would be like, yeah, that's fine. And I think also people are more used to guys normally known as being funny not being that funny. Again, we've seen that with Jim Carrey with like Eternal Sunshine. We'd seen Robin Williams do that more than once throughout his career, playing more serious roles. So the fact that they didn't market it well originally does not surprise me that it didn't really get much in the way of even possibly getting on the Academy's radar, because yes, you do have to campaign. It's very much like an election. You have to campaign for recognition with the Academy. And if they couldn't even market this to get a decent box office return, they sure as hell weren't going to know how to market it for any sort of awards. Which is unfortunately just one of those things. This is just going to have to be one of those movies that didn't necessarily do well when it was released, but years after the fact, people are discovering it and going, oh, this isn't just not bad. This is actually quite good. And word of mouth is going to be what, maybe eventually puts us into maybe not necessarily a cult classic, but definitely, don't sleep on this movie type film, I think. So, but time will tell. Like I said, it's only been 10 years. So there's still lots of time. 20 years, whatever. Still, that's not a lot of time. That's like not a lot of time, and then also like 500 years in the Hollywood years. So Hollywood is a fickle thing, as we've learned after doing this show for as long as we have.
Exactly. Speaking of which, yes, we're going on to our 6th year of this podcast. So I think by now, if we haven't learned anything after 6 years, I think we'll never learn anything. But I guess at this point, we have understood, I guess, pretty much what the Academy Awards are about. But yes, I definitely recommend this film to my parents as well, because I think they'll get a kick out of it. And I think they'll enjoy it. And yeah, this film is exactly the film that feels more recognized than it actually was. Because if you look at it honestly, there were a few areas where I agree with Christine, a nomination at the 79th Academy Awards would have made complete sense. First, definitely Best Original Screenplay. I mean, the structure alone is doing something very tricky. It's playing with authorship and fate and awareness without becoming confusing or self-indulgent. And that balance is very hard to pull off. It's thoughtful, but still accessible. And the Academy often says it values originality, and this is a clear case of that. Second, I will also agree, Best Supporting Actress for Emma Thompson. I mean, there's a restraint in that performance that could easily be overlooked. It's not flashy, but it carries the moral and emotional weight of the story. You can feel the conflict without it being spelled out. And that kind of control is usually what gets attention when voters are paying close enough attention. And I think you could even make a softer case for Will Ferrell. Not necessarily because it's the best performance of the year in a traditional sense, but because it's such a sharp departure from what he was known for. It's precise, it's quiet, and surprisingly vulnerable. And sometimes the Academy rewards that kind of shift, but just as often, it ignores it. As for wins, it probably wouldn't have taken home a major award that year. The competition was heavy, and more importantly, louder. I mean, if anything, screenplay or supporting actress would have been its best shot. When it comes to why I personally feel it was ignored, I think part of it comes down to tone. The film sits in a very awkward space. It's not fully a comedy, not fully a drama, not quite prestige in the traditional Oscar sense. I mean, the Academy, as we've learned, tends to gravitate toward clearer categories, films that signal their importance more obviously. And there's also the issue of subtlety. This is a film that doesn't push itself forward. It doesn't campaign emotionally in a big sweeping way. It asks you to lean in rather than overwhelming you. And that works beautifully for audiences who connect with it, but it can get lost in awards season where louder, more immediate films dominate the conversation. And I do think timing matters as well. That year had films that were culturally louder, politically sharper, or visually bigger. And in comparison, this one feels small, intimate, easy to admire, but just as easy to overlook when ballots are being filled out. So in a way, I think its absence from the nominations fits the film itself. It's not showy. It doesn't insist on recognition. It does its thing quietly. And if it finds you, it stays with you. And I will echo, of course, both Christine and Rachel's thoughts. Find it and let it stay with you because it's definitely worth the experience. So let's get to ratings then. Rachel, starting with you, what do you give this movie out of 10?
Oh, goodness. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. And like I said, it's a dark comedy, but it's not so dark that it's like, oh, this is kind of depressing and you don't necessarily want to watch it again. I think this is very rewatchable. Like, if anything ever else, just to watch, look for the little details. Every little thing that they built into this world that, to me, it's so fleshed out and so, everything seems intentional, and it's a great cast. If you're like a lot of us, you're like, oh, Will Ferrell, he's the one that does all those dumb comedies, like old school, like, yes, but again, just like some of his contemporaries and people who've had similar career paths, people like Jim Carrey, people like Robin Williams, just because you're known for being funny does not mean that you don't have range. I think this is a very, I don't want to say restrained performance, just because it's just a different type of performance is the thing. I think Will Ferrell is showing the range he is capable of. He just hadn't been given the material to do it. So it's not that he's reining himself in comparatively to something like a Ricky Bobby type character. It's more allowing him to stretch those muscles that he hasn't had an opportunity to use previously to this. And of course Emma Thompson. It's hard to dislike Emma Thompson in anything. The woman is just absolutely brilliant actress and can do anything, everything. Queen Latifah too. I mean, this isn't a huge role comparatively to some others, but she's a fantastic actress. I mean, she made that transition from being a musician, being essentially a rap artist to being, an Academy Award nominated actress, and I think she's, fantastic in this. I'm giving this an 8. This is just a good, solid film that, I think people should watch at least once, if not multiple times.
Great stuff. And Christine, you being the bringer of said movie, what do you give it out of 10?
Well, first, speaking of little details, Nick, I gotta ask, did you smoke all those cigarettes or did they come pre-smoked?
I asked
I
that
really
myself many times. My friends asked me that as well.
Um, this movie has stuck with me. I don't remember if I went to see it in the theater, yeah, but I saw it a long time ago, and I've owned it for a long time. I show it to a lot of people because I just think it's a worthwhile movie. I think everybody should see this movie, and it's stayed close to my heart for some reason. It's when I got told, "Hey, we want to bring you back on to Gold Standard. Bring a movie." I think, what movies are gold standards? That I gotta, something that would be worthy of a golden statue or two. And this is one of the ones that popped into my head almost immediately because it's so well crafted. And I think hard about what could make this movie better. And there are things that could make this movie showier, louder, more recognizable. I don't think any of those things would be right for this movie. I think this movie is exactly the movie it needs to be. Everything about it is exactly as it needs to be. Another award it might have won was Best Casting, Best Casting Director or something, because I can't imagine anybody else in any of these roles. They're all perfectly cast for this. And, I may, not be the most discerning person when it comes to thinking about these things, but I don't care. I love this movie and I want everybody to see it. I give this 10 out of 10 amps that go to 12.
Very nice indeed. And hey, I mean, as I said, any movie that is brought to us, we're always happy to discuss. I mean, seeing some of the choices that will be coming down the pike this year, I think will make for a very interesting conversations, where they be Oscar worthy or not. I'm going to give this a 7.5 out of 10. What holds it up, I think, is its restraint. It has genuinely an original idea, but it doesn't overplay it. The film trusts small moments, quiet shifts, and subtle performances to carry the weight. And that gives it a kind of sincerity that sticks. And it also manages something very rare. It's thoughtful without feeling heavy, to Rachel's point, and emotional without becoming sentimental. The performances, of course, help a lot with that. I mean, there's a carefulness across the board that matches the tone of the story. Nothing feels exaggerated, which keeps the premise grounded, even when it gets a little abstract. But at the same time, I think that restraint is also what keeps it from reaching higher to me. It plays things a little too safely in places where it could have pushed further emotionally or stylistically. The concept opens the door to something sharper or more daring, and the film only steps part way through. You can feel the edges of a more powerful version that it never fully commits to. And while the balance between humor and reflection mostly work, it occasionally softens moments that might have landed harder if the film had been more decisive in its tone. So I think it ends up in that space of being very good, even memorable, but not quite great. I mean, the kind of film you appreciate more the longer you sit with it, even if it doesn't completely overwhelm you while you're watching it. So as I said, I'm very glad I got to watch this film. I would definitely recommend to some folks, and I would love to actually sit down with somebody and see their reactions while watching it. So it's a 7.5 out of 10 for me. So getting thus to gold standard feedback this week, we do have some from Mr. Dave Proctor writing in about this one. So Rachel, what does Mr. Proctor have to say about this?
Well, he keeps it short, sweet, but to the point. He says, "Hello, cinephiles. Not the laugh out loud comedies that Will Ferrell is known for. Much more subtle. Enjoyable with some big names joining him. I saw this in the theater when it came out, but not since then, and I didn't retain any of it from then. I thoroughly enjoyed this rewatch, and I'm very glad it is on your list. Thanks, David K. Proctor."
Well, thank you, Dave. And so I guess thank you, Christine, then, because she is the reason why we're here talking about this movie. So, Dave, you're welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Keeping it as subtle as the movie.
Exactly. So, of course, dear listeners, if you want to be like Dave and share your thoughts on the films we discuss here, you can do so by shooting an email to goldstandardoscars@gmail.com. Once again, goldstandardoscars@gmail.com. If If you follow us on our social media, you can find us on X at Oscars Gold, Facebook as Gold Standard The Oscars Podcast, and also Blue Sky, where we're also at Oscars Gold. Love hearing from you guys and appreciate the follow and the support. Also, if you'd like to hear us discuss your favorite movies, you can join our wonderful family of patrons on Patreon and check out what we've going on there. Of course, you'll get to unlock our previous reviews of such films previously selected by our patrons, such as recently Captain Phillips, Censored Sensibility, The Illusionist, 1917, and many more. And speaking of which, when it comes to this month, of course, our listeners have selected Prey for us to review. So definitely looking forward to discussing some Yautja indeed. So to join our Golden Army, head on over to patreon.com/goldstandardoscars. And a big thank you to our wonderful patrons for their support. And finally, of course, regardless of the platform you're listening to this podcast on, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, be sure to rate and review us, as that allows our little podcast to reach more like-minded ears like yours, keeps the algorithm stimulated, and as always, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your pets, tell your co-workers. We don't care. Just spread the good word. Big thank you to those who have done so. Future thank you to those who will. So, Miss Christine, when you're not here gracing us with your presence in the Gold Standard Theatre, where can folks find you on the interwebs?
Mostly they can find me on Small Council Matters. It's a podcast about Game of Thrones and all Game of Thrones related shows. Most recently, we reviewed A Night of the Seven Kingdoms as it was released. If you haven't watched that show yet, it is much lighter and quicker than your standard Game of Thrones shows, and I definitely recommend you go check it out. You'll power through it in one day and be the better for it. We will come back again when season 3 of House of the Dragon comes on, and we'll be there after each episode to discuss in twice the length of the episode what happened. Also, you can check out my portfolio website. I'm attempting to be a graphic designer now that I got my degree. It's christineperuski.xyz. I am currently working on updating my portfolio, but you can see all of my wonderful school projects on there.
Fantastic stuff, and congrats on getting your degree, and that's a wonderful thing, and here is to a bright and great future when it comes to incredible designing capabilities. And Rachel, where can folks find you?
Well, you can find me with the Five-ish Fangirls podcast, a usually weekly fandom, entertainment, pop culture podcast where we talk about all sorts of geeky and nerdy topics from the female perspective, because fangirls are real fans too. We can be found pretty much wherever you find podcasts, and we do have finally a new episode that will be in the feeds, hopefully by the end of this week as we're recording this. That return to work, and after 2 weeks off for spring break and going back to getting up at 5 a.m. It's been a fun transition. But we can be found pretty much wherever you find podcasts, and at the Five-ish Fangirls.com, where you can connect with all of our podcast related social media accounts and our individual ones as well, which I highly recommend you do so, because as crazy it is to think, PopCon is next month.
Crazy how time flies, and it's amazing that we're on our way to the month of May before we know it, which, as I said, blows my mind for sure. I mean, Easter just passed me by. I'm like, wow, okay. And when it comes to our absentee co-host, of course, Zan Sprouse, be sure to check out everything she has going on, because, of course, you can find her and our friend Charles Skaggs on Drunk Cinema, where they enjoy their favorite adult beverages, adult conversations, of course, and discuss movies for your entertainment. And furthermore, if you want to follow Zan on her social media, your best bets are TikTok, I believe, and Instagram, where her handle is Udinax19. When it comes to myself, folks, you can find me at my day job, hosting the radio show Whiskey and Cigarettes, where we play the very best and nothing but the best of country music for you guys, from Alabama to Bailey Zimmerman. For more information about that, you can visit our website, which is whiskeyandcigarettesshow.com. Podcast-wise, you can also find myself and the man from North Carolina, Keith Bliss, on Happiness in Darkness, the superhero movie podcast, where we do discuss any and every superhero movie under the sun and more. We recently reviewed the Lego Batman movie and had a blast doing that. Coming up next, we're going to be reviewing a film
That's my favorite Batman movie.
It's a really fun time, and it was great to revisit. Speaking of, well, not actually revisiting, we're going to be actually coming up next. We're going to be reviewing a film that I've never seen. I know the title, but I've never watched it. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. So I guess what we'll make of that. Keith has seen it multiple times. I never have.
A fun one. I watched that with someone who is a bit of an Abraham Lincoln fan and found out that it pairs nicely with true history.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll see what I make of that. The title just seems so ridiculous at the time. Nah, I'm not going to watch this. But because of Mr. Bliss, I am going to watch it. And last but certainly not least, myself and that Charles Skaggs guy are currently in the Fandom Zone and on the Fandom Zone podcast, where we're currently reviewing the second season of Daredevil Born Again. And that is something I do love because the Man Without Fear is my all-time favorite Marvel character. And we're having a blast doing that. And speaking of Marvel and of the things to come on this show, as our wait for the 99th Best Picture continues, we will be reviewing a film that Rachel selected, and that will be the 2012 Joss Whedon film, The Avengers. So definitely talking a lot on my MCU right there. So first off, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a joy having you on. And of course, on behalf of myself, Rachel, and Zan, we definitely look forward to having you back with us again with more of your movie selections.
Thank you very much for having me and inviting me, Nick. And I am so glad that I got to introduce you to one of my favorite films and that you liked it.
I tend to be generous for the most part. I mean, there are times when I surprise Keith with how much I hate certain films, but this one we were very, very glad to talk about. So, Rachel, anything you would like to add on our upcoming movie or anything else before we sign off?
I tried to really contain myself.
The excitement is real, folks.
Oh my God. Yes. This is my ride or die with the MCU. So this is what the phase one had been leading up to, and it's not been the same ever since. The first Avengers movie changed everything in so many ways. So yeah, oh my God. I know this movie inside and out and upwards, downwards, backwards. It's going to take everything I have not to quote the entire thing.
You know, I really, really love the Avengers as well. But I have to say my favorite Avengers moment happens in Age of Ultron. Involving the hammer. You know, everybody trying out the hammer and what that scene led to later on in the movie. It was one of those perfect moments for me. But of course, we couldn't have had that movie without this one first.
Mm-hmm.
This was definitely a film that is incredibly iconic and I think changed the superhero movie genre in a big way. So I think we'll definitely have a lot to talk about when it comes to this one. So, folks, thanks as always, this is show and supporting us. Big thank you, of course, to Kristen Peruski for joining us this week. We will see you next time with The Avengers and on Patreon with Prey. Until then, enjoy those movies. Keep that popcorn hot. Big thank you to Dave for writing in. And all around, thank you all so much for the privilege of your time. Ciao, my people.
Make the quality of your life better than quality pancakes.